Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Rob Turley, your host of Down the Rabbit Hole podcast, and today with me, I've got someone who does RevOps just like I do. So super exciting stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good to be here, Rob. Seamus Luis-Earle, founder CEO of Carabiner Group. We do RevOps as a service, so placing fractional RevOps folks inside your organizations to act like members of your own team, help you to scale, break down the silos, do all the fun things that RevOps folks do. I live, breathe, eventually will die in the RevOps hole that we exist in here, and really
That
passionate about
sounds
it.
very lonely and depressing.
Hey, RevOps, it's one of those things, man. You know it the same way as I do. It's you got to search high and low for the compatriots in the space.
It's so true. I'm so happy that we got introduced to one another because it is so hard to find someone else who does the stuff. It's kind of ridiculous. It's the way the market's shifting, though. I mean, some of there's 4 RevOps firms out right now that exist today.
It is something weird like that. I mean, frankly, we're the fastest growing in the United States right now, right? And it's crazy how fast RevOps has become a part of the conversation and how little anybody knows about what it actually is. It's not like you and I talked about it. It's not like it's a hard concept per se. Super important, super essential. But it's a wild thing. You get these like 25 people probably globally who are the best in the biz, and then a whole bunch of folks trying to get there, and this whole gap in between. Right? It's a weird space to be in right now.
It is a very weird space. And if my company ever didn't work out, I would come to you to be like, yo, I'm hopping on this train. Not gonna lie. It's a lot of
Welcome
fun.
aboard.
For sure. And so I want to break it down just simply to kind of bring it to the table for everybody listening of what RevOps is. So it's the unification of the revenue operations processes. So it's de-siloing divisions within a company, such as sales, marketing, CS. You've got advertising, and then sometimes, even if they have this split, which I think is absolutely nuts, business development, because business development is sometimes separate from sales, which makes absolutely zero sense to me. Although it is somewhat a marketing function.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, I would almost add in finance as well, right? Finance has a play in it. I think it's interesting because everybody views it slightly differently, right? I think what you just said is very clear. It's the revenue through line, right? Across the entire company from the first time a customer interacts with you to the last time, right? And the intent is like it's a function that sits between the folks on the ground, the operators, and the executive function, right? Like it's how do you interpret all of this data stuff that all the people down here are doing and make sure that the executives can actually act upon it. That's how we look at it, at least.
yeah, it's from cradle to grave.
Yeah.
The very moment that they are aware of you, or even before they're aware of you,
Before they know they're aware of you, right? That's the
exactly. It's
critical
like,
part.
where have I seen that before? That type of thing. But then all the way to the grave, meaning the sale never ends. And this is a common misconception. The sale does not end after the closed won deal. There's ink on the paper and there's money in the bank. That means a transaction was made. The sale doesn't end until after they decide, I never want to work with this person ever again for the rest of my career or in a pine box. It's that simple, whether it's the company in the pine box or the person in the pine box.
It is funny because to go down the rabbit hole
No pun
on
intended.
the RevOps function just a little bit, right? It's funny how even RevOps folks end up focusing on a couple of those things and then neglecting the others, right? Like one of the things that we've been realizing recently is that folks internally focus almost none of their time on customer success, right? To your point, right? They don't consider once the money is in the bank, they think that's it, right? And when reality is you have to continuously resell that customer time after time after time. And it's just as big a part of the process. It's just a big part of the revenue, retaining it as it is getting it in the first place.
For
And
sure.
it's just as crucial a part of RevOps, right?
Yeah, one interesting thing now, I wrote an article called The Confessions of a RevOps Hitman. It's on GTM Mag. It's kind of funny because it's very irreverent, though. I'm not trying to talk about myself here. I'm just trying to say that the breakdown, I got so much outreach toward me after writing this. Why? Because it was just a breakdown of how it all works. Just as simple as the sales team needs to be providing the data so that the marketing team actually knows what's going on and why people are buying, literally why they are buying and doing business with you, which feeds into the marketing. The marketing team can now have a conversation with new prospective individuals to speak the language of the customer and talk to them in a way that's saying, you're getting this value in this way. This is why people buy from us, which feeds the sales team the right leads so that they can successfully sell to MQLs, not just garbage, which then feeds into the CS team because they're actually dealing with people who are a fit for the product instead of people who aren't a fit to create a CS nightmare and then have them work too many hours and it just becomes a whole shit show, which they report to the product team. The product team starts innovating the wrong features for the wrong client that are going to churn quickly anyway. But then when the CS team is reporting the right features for the right client, that's overall a happier client, higher longevity. The product team is not wasting their time. And then that type of an experience gets fed back to the marketing team to be able to market to the existing clients. And then the CS team is able to collect the data that's necessary to inform the sales team that it's time to start selling to them again, or even just tie in a sales function into the CS team so they can upsell them themselves and have a consistent relationship.
Well, it's like it's simplified. It's bullshit in, bullshit out, right? And bullshit all the way through. And that's the problem is that you think about it, it's such a critical function, right? It fundamentally, you can have a great product and a crappy process and get to a certain point, right? You can become a Series A startup with very little process. And then to go from A to B or to go, what everybody wants to do, go to that decacorn perspective, process becomes everything. Your go to market becomes everything. And folks don't know how to do it, right? And then you compound that with the fact that we're seeing on average RevOps folks stick in their roles at companies about 12 to 14 months, right? 12 to 14 months in one role. That's about 4 months to get, acclimated, about 4 months to do anything, about 4 months to leave, right? And then all that strategy that they worked on
4
and
months
all of
to
the
leave.
processes, bye-bye, I'm going off to your competitor, and there's nobody inside the organization that knows what to do about it anymore.
Right. Yeah. No, the whole thing just collapses.
Yeah. And you're back to zero again, right? And you got to start all over with a new person.
It's very difficult for RevOps folks to come into a company because they get very little support or no budget. I've spoken to the very few RevOps folks that are around, or even sales enablement, because it's a similar role, but not quite as unicentric.
Yeah.
And they often get no budget or low budget if they're lucky. So how are you supposed to make these changes if nobody else is on board? They're always fighting you and there's no budget.
Well, not to, I started out doing this purely to solve a problem. And then the model that we operate on, built out of how do we solve the problems in the ecosystem. So I'll talk about how we work with people, right? We do it all fractionally, right? You need to work on HubSpot. You purchase 10 hours from us to do whatever it is on the RevOps stack you need, right? HubSpot, Salesforce, ZoomInfo, Seamless, whatever it is, right? We're there and we've got the subject matter experts to do it. And so this is what I always tell people, even the well-funded, well-budgeted startups, right? They go and they hire somebody. They hire Rob. Rob goes and works for them. Rob costs them X amount of dollars. Rob's not going to be an expert in everything, right? Nobody can be. And so then they have to go and hire an agency to do it anyways, right? And they got to hire the HubSpot agency, and then they got to hire the Salesforce agency, and then they got to go to the go-to-market experts and the marketing funnel up guys. And, you got to do all of that together, and it quickly gets to be, a well-equipped RevOps team at, Neo4j or something like that. They're costing $1 million a year, right? Like it's an expensive proposition to do it right because you've got to have everybody full-time working on these things. Our proposition is, hey, you don't need somebody full-time. You need somebody partially, right? And you need the right person at the right time. And you don't want to have to deal with all of these different agencies. Work with one and have them help you and scale you from A to E and go public, right? All the while your needs are changing and scaling. So, you're right? If you've got limited budget, but it's super important, how do you deal with it? I guess you got to start somewhere. And that's where a fractional resource comes in.
So out of curiosity, what are what is the most difficult experience that you've seen working with folks as far as RevOps goes, where you see the greatest mistake made in a company that has everything going for it, but it's a total blocker?
Well, it's when the happy moment of their life becomes the saddest. And what I mean by that is when they let's say they go through a Series A, right? And then they see very intense growth and they raise a Series B at a crazy up round. Okay. That should be a happy moment, right? It should mean that they can take that money and grow. But anytime you take money from someone, what ends up happening is you become beholden to those people, and you've made certain promises of like, I take money, and so you gave me $45 million, but I'm expected to do 200 million in sales this year because of it. And they're forecasting based off of the former growth rates, right, that they've managed to do up to that
which in no respect can be any type of accurate.
Well, this is the whole thing, right? If you've got a good RevOps instance, well, then at least you know what your CAC to LTV ratio is. You know where
Right.
you
I
really
was
should be
speaking
spending
in,
your time.
in general terms, right?
Exactly, right? And that's the whole thing, is that they're able to get to a certain point without having it down right. And then they hit a brick wall. And then they've taken money from VCs who are expecting their return on investment quickly. They've given up control of their companies in some instances, right? And it's all based off of the fact that their processes aren't squared away. Their
Yeah.
processes and their technologies.
And all the projections are usually done based off of finance. When you take the operations out of it, oftentimes, with the company that I have, I've worked with some folks. And what happened was we increased their sales by 7x within a short period of time. What did that mean? It meant that they had to discontinue using us as a provider simply because they didn't have the operations to handle it and almost bankrupted themselves.
Yeah.
Due to the fact that they could not handle it operationally. Getting too many clients at once can also bankrupt a company. It seems like a happy moment that turns to the saddest moment because you have to turn everybody away. You can't fulfill contracts, and then you start getting into some legal trouble.
What happens when you take the money but you can't actually deliver on the work product?
That's considered sales fraud, which is a white collar crime, and
Yeah.
you'll spend about 6 to 12 months in jail for it.
Well, that's the whole thing, right? I mean, that's where at the end of the day, you're going to try and scale. And then who's going to suffer? It's going to be customer success. It's going to be your SDR team. It's going to be any number of different people that fundamentally you're going to start bleeding talent. It starts with the process and the technology. Now, the alternative, right? If you manage to get it set up correctly and you put, $50 million worth of accelerant on it, then you're ready to go, right? Then your wildest dreams are coming true because you can go the distance. You can scale as completely, at a reasonable rate, obviously, but you can do the 10 to 150 person acceleration path, that hockey stick that everybody's going after. But
Yeah,
it all
and
comes with the
what
process.
type of just out of that for that hockey stick?
Yeah.
You can dump as much money as you want to into marketing. For example, what is it? About 70% of Salesforce's marketing or Salesforce's budget out of the money that they made, the revenue that they brought in, went toward marketing for the first 9 years. That's why there's such a freaking behemoth in the market, right? Though
Yeah.
they have the operational processes to be able to handle that. You can dump all your money into marketing like everybody else does. You'll start growing like crazy, but if you don't have the operational pieces in place, it's going to be self-destructive. Now, what would you say about it being worth putting in the operational structures first before even enabling that growth? That may upset some of the investors, but it is everything, the foundation to the rest of it.
The funny thing is that the investors, like, we do a lot of business with private equity and venture capital funds, right? Who want to know that the process is there, right? We're seeing higher valuations if the process is there. We're seeing better multiples if the process is there. That the technology is there. If even the data that they're reporting is clean enough that they can depend on it to make projections, right? Like, so broadly speaking, oddly enough, the investors and the backers are actually really in favor of it. It's the internal folks who may be new, right? Basically, it's smart people who came up with a good idea and just haven't been operators long enough to realize the importance of this type of a function. At the end of the day, they've got every reason to invest a relatively small amount of money, right? Like, somebody like us costs you 150K a year. That's not a lot relative to a scaling startup to ensure that your systems are well set up and taken care of, right? Something like that is a preventative measure. It's an insurance policy that
That's a
fundamentally,
very inexpensive RevOps solution.
right?
From what I know, a lot of them are over a mil.
Yeah,
Easy.
right. And this is the whole thing of like, we do it not because, money's great. Great, but like, that's not why I'm in it. We could charge double, triple what we do. It's because
Easily.
people need the help, right? Like, they need this insight and they need it now when they can't, quote unquote, afford it, right? They need it at Series A. They need it at Series B. They need it at pre-seed, right? To get on the right setup and the right footing in order to be able to not have problems later on. So, to it's not a concise answer by any stretch of the imagination, but like the main thing is you need to start when you don't feel it. It's the same thing with funding, right?
Oh, it's like that with anything.
Right? And you need it before you need it.
Because
Or
by the
before
time
you
you can
think you
get
need
it,
it.
or by the time that it's set up, that's when the burning need happens.
Exactly. Right?
Yeah.
It's at least 6 months, right? To get a good system, scaled system, like in place with people using it. So, we advise as soon as you can, whether it's with us or with somebody else, right? Think about where you're going and why your systems are going to fail you in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months down the line, and get ready for it.
Because they eventually will. I don't care how
Yeah.
big you are. If you grow, your systems will fail. You have to readapt, readapt, readapt.
Every time you triple, right? That's the, 1 to
Oh, is that
3,
what it
3
is?
to 9. So we always say that it's like with any business, every time you triple, everything breaks and needs to be rebuilt, right? So if you're a solopreneur business and you end up going to 3 people, you got to change everything, right? Then if you go from 3 to 9 or 10 people, you're going to have to change everything again, 10 to 30. And then the 30, it goes from 30 to like 150, 150 to 500, and from there. But it's roughly the 1 to 3 ratio where processes change, hierarchies change, systems change, people change, expectations change, the whole thing. Um, and that's why it's also not really a snapshot, right? Like you don't just get it set up once and expect that it'll work forever. You have a good foundation, but then you got to build on it and scale it and evolve it over time.
I love how you make this point too, because I personally try to make this recommendation to people when they're selling to use company size segments as the
Mhm.
universal pain indicator. Because based off of their operational processes and the size in which they exist, I don't care how much revenue they're bringing in. I don't care how many customers they have. I could not give a shit about any of that. If you use that as the universal indicator of what pain they're feeling, based on the industry, if you know the industry well enough and the company
Mhm.
sizes and what they're feeling, it's almost across the board the exact same problem for every single company within that range of size.
The funny thing, I don't disagree with you by that by any stretch. The funny thing is how ubiquitous RevOps is. So we don't get to adhere to that same advice, right? Like we have
Right.
like 3-person companies who are customers, and we have 3,000-person companies who are customers, and everything in between. And so what we find is do people know that they need it? If they know that we need it, we have a 50% close rate, right? If they have money, we have a 50% close rate. And it's a very quick sales cycle too, because they hear the solution, right? They understand the logic of it and they go for it, right? It's anything else outside of that realm, right? If it stretches last more than a month in terms of a sales cycle, chances are they're not at the point where they've hurt enough before to see the value in what we're doing,
Oh, you need to be some serious pain,
right?
and
With a
it's like
scar tissue
life
thing,
or death.
right?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing about any VP of sales, right? Who came from being a salesperson, knows the pain of that salesperson trying to meet quota, so gets the fact that now he needs to see the data, and he knows how much it sucks to work in a badly configured sales force, and so he feels it, right? Like he knows what that means. He can embrace it from an emotional perspective, and then realize the value that comes to the table. But a brand new founder who's never been in the trenches before, right? Like they don't get it. And it's not their own fault, right? Like that's not the thing. But it's still, it's a learning curve that you got to get around, right? You got to listen to the people around you who are saying, hey, you got to pay attention to this, even if it doesn't innately make sense to you yet, because eventually it's going to, and it's going to come in the form of dagger, from the back.
And when you're working with these VPs of sales, I mean, getting the executive buy-in when it comes to this, because multiple decision makers. If you're talking a company over 200, you're talking to 5 to 9. If you're talking like a mid-market company, now it's up to what? It's up to like 14 to 16 people that are involved, influencers, decision makers. Enterprise, it's in the 20s.
Yeah.
So, what type of red tape do you deal with? Does it usually kind of just all fall down when you spit out your value prop?
Oddly enough, there isn't that much red tape that we go through. We go through legal reviews, right? That's usually the thing that takes the longest. We work
Well, that's any
exclusively.
contract.
Well, yeah, that's where we work exclusively on long-term engagements, so a year or more in terms of our contracts. So
Well, what can you get done in the RevOps world in less than 6 months?
well, that's the whole thing. But you look at it, you look at the space right now, right? And there's so much work out there for people that they would much rather take 50 grand for 3 months of work and leave a customer ambiguously okay with the output, move on to the next of 50 other clients who need their help, and just keep racking in the funds, right? Like the supply and demand model does not require keeping anybody happy or putting out anything other than subpar results.
Yeah, it's a state of happy at a given freeze frame.
Yeah. And it's also, we were just talking about the education piece. These guys don't know, right? You could put a purple elephant in front of them and they wouldn't know whether that was a working RevOps system or not, right? And so that's where you get a signature on the statement of work and you leave, and 3 weeks later it breaks. That client isn't going to be happy, but who cares? You've got all this business, right? And in our model, it's like, well, that doesn't work, right? Like that's not sustainable. I want to grow this business, right? I want happy customers. I want to be a part of them, right? I want to bring them to be public one day, not be up there ringing the bell, but be at the after party, right? Like we want to be a part of that, and there's no way to do it with anything less than a year long.
You're absolutely right. Well,
And
what
so-
are some of the things you've done for companies? Let's say if they had a totally displaced system. Let's say they had a good sales process, they had a good marketing process, they also had a great CS process. Everything on its own is good, and I'm sure you've ran into a business like this before. Everything on its own is good in the silos in which they exist. When you knocked down or toppled those silos, what did that turn into? How did that approach go when you started mixing them together?
I mean, you see it all the time, right? So I guess like an example, let's say there's a company that we're working with that has great processes in all three of those, right? Private equity acquired, and they are looking at breaking down those silos and understanding what is actually going to propel them from one stage of growth to the next. Right. And we've already
Oh
started.
wow, that's so rare that people are open to that type of thing.
Well, that's the whole thing. The PE acquired them, replaced the CEO, and this guy was like, okay, I need to know how we're going to change this business from a $5 million business to a $20 million business over the next 2 years. Right. And how am I going to do that? I know that each of these pieces, this arm is working, this arm is working, the other leg is working, right? But they're not operating together.
They're not strung together, yeah.
And that's what, like, we have to get them strong together. And he recognized that because he's an operator and he's been around and he knows that that's important. And so, we come in and we evaluate and we say, okay, right there, that's a problem. Right there, marketing's super weak, right? You may look good, but it wasn't actually, right? There's corrosion there. We got to fix that. We got to connect marketing to sales and making sure, to your point, that they're working MQLs, and how well qualified are they, and what sales process do they follow, because they're SMB versus mid-market to enterprise level, right? And establishing what those
Each
look
one
like.
should have a different process, should have
Right.
a different approach, it should have a different sequence segmentation. It should have, yeah.
And that's where, and it's not enough just to say it. You need the structure to support it as well, right? Because that's where a lot of folks get away with, hey, I've got a 5-person sales team. They all know if it's this size, they follow these things. If it's that size,
They all know. That is the best answer there is. They all know. Yeah, until they don't.
And that's where it's like, yeah, until they don't, until you're 50, or you're trying to go from 5 to 50 because you just onboarded people or onboarded money, and that's what it's supposed
But then
to
the
be.
expectation is that, they'll know.
Yeah.
They've never
and
worked
they don't.
for you before.
Right? It's impossible for them to know, right? Like that's never going to be a sufficient answer unless,
It's your star child, rarely, but
right, you've got a star child, or right, they actually put in the time to put this sort of system in place where it's like it spells it out, right? There's a 2-day onboarding process and it spells out, this is what our expectations are, this is what happens if you do X, Y, and Z, and the system is supporting it. And just, I mean, it is the unicorn, right? I happened across one really recently, like a really good operator, self-taught operator, went in and actually structured it appropriately, right? And as a result, this Australian startup that has now a US entity that they are scaling into is experiencing rapid growth, and it's not as stressful as it is for everybody else.
I think I know who you're talking about.
And maybe, but I it's not public, so I can't tell you the name. But
Yeah,
it's
no, I
very
understand that. That's why I'm not mentioning
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
And that's where it's like, it's amazing what happens if it's done well, right? This is where it's opportunity cost more than anything else. As a principal, right? You spend 150K or 250K, right? And you unlock 20 million a year in recurring revenue. Like, I'm as skeptical of a person as anybody, But at the end of the day, all you got to do is look at it on a cost benefit analysis. If I can save each person in the company 15 minutes a day by automating certain tasks, right? You break it down to its very simplest.
Multiply that by 100. Those right there, sir, are hidden costs. And
Right.
nobody calculates the hidden costs. Nobody looks at the cost of opportunity loss. Nobody looks at the cost of potential revenue loss or pipeline loss. And
Mhm.
they're too focused on how can we fill the pipeline as fat as possible and then just hope everything goes through that we can get through. Why not be targeting the people that are most likely to go through that pipeline smoothly? And you need to be looking at the data, using a data driven approach, using things to make the process predictable, the pipeline predictable. And often that stuff is totally ignored. There needs to be a lot of operational processes in place to be able to even support that type of visibility.
Yeah.
And people
No,
don't
I'm
know
with you.
what those things are.
And that's where it's like, it's okay to not know what to do, right? And it's okay to self-diagnose and say, I need help, in which case there's people out there to help you, right? But that's the piece that I find to be, that's our biggest challenge. Like, we have no problem with growth. We've tripled every tier for the last 2 years, right? Like, we're going to keep doing that. But the biggest thing that stands in our way is education. It's getting out there and letting people know, hey, we exist, right? Hey,
Yep.
there are solutions, right? In a market where right now you can't get a good RevOps person for less than X dollars, an hour, and even then they don't stick around, right? Like, it seems like an insurmountable challenge. And so sometimes people just have to throw up their hands and say, I can't, I don't know how. And they push it off and push it off until it's too late. And so that's, I mean, I'm not an emotional guy, but I'd say like, that's sad to me, right? Like these people have great ideas. We get to work with some incredible companies that are going to change the way that people look at things, right? There's one company, it's called Neutral, incredible company, Neutrl. They carbon offset purchases made on the internet, right? It's like, it's the craziest stuff,
That's wild.
right? It's a crazy cool idea, and they're early, and they're, they recognize the value right off the bat, and so they're going to be able to scale so much quicker, right? And I'm excited for them because we get to be a part of it. And I can only imagine, right, if they didn't recognize it, they wouldn't be able to scale as quickly. And these ideas that people have, these companies that are so brilliant and great and doing good in the world, regardless of how you look at that, right? Like what that form actually looks like, they need the help and they need to be able to be set up for success. And I don't know.
You're
I'm really,
getting me
really
excited,
about
but this stuff is like my favorite stuff to talk about. So it's just what you're talking about is getting me going, really.
it.
And I hope everybody who's listening is getting them going too, and or making them think about what it is that they're currently doing and how you could possibly change that yourself.
Yeah.
That self-diagnostics are okay, but bringing in a professional is always a good thing. I mean, even do you do what like consultations, free consultations to get like
Yeah.
an idea?
So that's where we'll talk with people all the time. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you're in the space, so you probably know the name Rosalind Santaelena.
Oh yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
we just hired Rosalind, so she's our chief RevOps officer
Oh
now.
really? She's awesome. You're
Right?
lucky.
And she's awesome, and she's gonna be coming on board just to talk with people, right? Like, she was doing all that stuff for free as part of her other job, and now her job is going to be out there in the world and evangelize about RevOps and teach people and educate them and talk with them and help them fundamentally. And
That's a
then
good
if they
place
need
for her.
hands on keyboard, we're there to help, right? Like,
Yeah,
that's okay.
that's a great place to put her too. I'm sure she's going to be super happy.
Yeah, I'm excited for it because I always like when people do it out of the goodness of their heart to a degree, right? Like, she was doing it because she's passionate about RevOps, and now we're able to go in there and help a much broader group of people because she doesn't have to focus on leading a RevOps instance inside of a company anymore. She gets to go out and like spread that wisdom around. Um, I don't know. I'm really excited for it.
Honestly,
Should be
that's what I
enjoyable.
want. I mean,
Yeah, right.
that's what
Like,
I
that's the
want.
whole thing, right? Isn't that the best possible situation?
It really is, though. It really is. This is why you're getting me so excited. It's just like, yes, that's exactly what I want with my life. You're gonna freaking push me through to a career switch for God's sake.
There we go, Rob. One
But
podcast. That's
yeah,
all it
no, I
took.
literally live for it, and it's just like this podcast. Why do I do it? There's no ads. There's nothing like that. I do it to help people learn.
Yeah,
Period. There's
right.
nothing in it for me. Except occasionally people come to me for help. Sure, that's great. That's a side benefit, but there is no actual fiscal push for this. There's no products. There's no memorabilia. There's none of that shit. It's literally just to help people. And people like you, Seamus, who can bring this type of value and knowledge to the table is the reason I do it.
It's an interesting, world we live in from that perspective, right? The philosophy of give to get, right? I belong to Pavilion, huge fan of everything that they're doing over there. And they have that philosophy as well, right? In a paid membership program, right? It is all about giving as much as you can of your expertise, of your knowledge, of your experience, right? And inevitably, the universe returns that giveness, right? Like because you're a good person and you're putting it out there and you're supporting people and helping them.
When you help someone, they will try to help you as best they can. I
Yeah.
mean, this is one of the tricks to marketing too. Good marketing. This is I don't know if a lot of people know about this, but a very talented marketer told me this. I don't have much experience in actually the action of marketing myself, so I'm
Mm.
not to speak on this. I forget who told me to, so I feel really bad about that. But it stuck with me. uh, it stuck with me is that if you even provide a piece of marketing content that is so powerful and is so valuable and helps solve a problem, somebody feels like they have to go out of their way to help you and they've never even met you. They just know that you wrote the piece of content that helped them. So they're either going to reach out to you to do business with you, which is generally why you create marketing content, right? On the other hand, is that they will refer. I've gotten referrals from people from the podcast that I've never even met before. That's
Yeah.
how it works, is that if you create a piece of content that is that powerful, people will refer people to you that haven't met you because they feel like they know you, they feel like they trust you, and they feel like they owe you something without a direct interaction.
Yeah. And that's where, it's funny because there are definitely ways to look at it that, you treat it tactically, right? Like you treat it in a way that's, oh, I'm doing this so that I can get something back. Right. And frankly, those people are going to be just as productive, but I don't really have the time or brain space to really look at it that way. Right. Like if you live in a way, men and women for others, right? Like if you do that as a philosophy, it's just so much easier, right? You just live your life that way. And then eventually people will pay it back. Right. People like working with people they enjoy content from, life with, etc. Right. We're having a
People do
dinner.
business with people they know, like, and trust.
Right. That's the whole thing. But you think about how fundamentally simple that is and yet challenging for people to respect and adhere to, right? Like you think about a good realtor. Good realtor has an ever expanding book of business, but every time they have a client, that client usually sticks with them unless they move like way out of state or something like that. They stick with them for most of their career, right? Everybody we've ever bought a house, like we've bought a house from the same people with the same people every time we've ever done it, right?
Yeah.
And that's that.
And what's the realtor's job? It's to sell a dream.
Mhm.
It has nothing to do with the house. Well, it does have to do with that. They have to
It does.
like the house.
Yeah.
But outside of the product, you're selling a dream. You're helping the person imagine this is where you're going to raise your child. This is where you're going to have backyard barbecues. This is what you're selling them on the dream of living in the perfect home. That's it. It's just an emotional response. It's the limbic system.
But it's an emotional response that if you don't make good on it, you'll lose the customer, right? And this is
Right.
what I mean. The know, like, and trust thing is so critical, right? Like we've never ran a paid ad in our life. Um, we probably should soon, relatively speaking, but
I
we've
get
never
that. We
done
don't
it, right?
either.
Like, and so most, if not all of our business comes from referrals, right? Like that's pretty awesome. That's pretty cool. That's such a mark of like, you know, you're doing good work. And I think that's what people should adhere, aspire to everywhere, right? It doesn't work in every instance, but like it would be great if every customer you onboarded brought you a customer because they were talking about how good a customer experience they had
And
when they
this
bought.
ties right back into RevOps, where people think, oh, after I make the sale, the transaction is done, the sale is
Mhm.
dead. The salesperson should stay in touch, continuously talk to them, keep that relationship alive. Because if they leave the company, go somewhere else, they'll bring you on, right?
Yep.
Or in the case of you're bringing them through the system, now they move into the CS space. If you just let it drop off and say fuck it to the customer, like most people do, the customer's dead to them. Yeah, they already spent money with us, just whatever. Just have them run through the motions, send them automated messages, help them whenever shit hits the fan. That's the next piece, is that it's bringing them through that process and you're maintaining the know, like, and trust through the entire cradle to grave process that we talked about in the beginning.
Yeah.
That's something you need to remind them of. You need to renew. every single time. Every turn, every touch.
Every interaction is simultaneously is a make or break. Fundamentally, right? In a business, every interaction is a make or break. I mean, it's we've bought software, right? And we've signed annual agreements because it was great all the way through the sales process, and then it drops off entirely when it comes to customer success, and we don't renew. And that is not a unique experience, right? I'm just talking from the consumer perspective. That shit happens a lot, right? And God forbid they're an important customer, because once that perspective is gained 6 months through the contract term, you're going to have to work like hell to get back that person's trust in the last 3 months, when you have an automated cadence go out saying, oh, it's time for your renewal, can we help you in any way, shape, or form, right? Like that's
Oh yeah. They reach out to you. They pretended you didn't exist for
Mhm.
9 months. Then they reach out saying, "Hey, you ready for your renewal?" They're acting like they're your best friend. Like what the hell is happening?
And it's like, why, like, who thought that would work anyways, right? Like, you also have to question that a little bit when you're like, oh yeah, 3 months automated cadence, 4 emails, that will absolutely get me the result I need, right? No, it won't. And anybody thinking about it logically knows that it won't, right? And it
Would you? People don't think about it from the other side. Would you want that? No, you wouldn't. So why are you doing it to other people and expecting a different result?
that was what's it, the definition of insanity is
Doing the
doing the
same
same
thing
thing
over and over
twice
again,
and,
expecting a
and
different result.
expecting the same outcome, right? And it's like, if it's not working, if it wouldn't work on you, why would it work on anybody else?
Well, because I'm different.
Oh yeah, you're special, right?
Oh,
That's the whole thing. It's funny. It, the I was so we use Trinet for like benefits and payroll administration and all that shit. And when we were signing up with them, I hadn't turned in the paperwork yet, and so the rep reached out to me a couple times, and it was more so just like I had to get it notarized and stuff. So I had the paper copy and everything. And she emails me, "Hey, Seamus, I've got the box at Chase Center tonight, right? Like, it's Warriors versus Suns, some crazy game. Love for you to come up, bring a +1, and come to the game. I need to know soon, because otherwise I got to give the ticket away, right?" Within 15 minutes, I had responded saying, "Okay, I got the paperwork. I'll scan it when I get home. Here's the, I'd love to
talk
come
about
up."
incentive.
And I went up, right? And it's like, okay, that worked on me. So what do? We go and buy a box at SAP Center for the San Jose Sharks, right? And that's what we're running now, right? And it's because it worked. It worked on a buyer like me, and it worked on buyers all over the.
Check out a company if you want to have those multiple touches a year for good clients, things like that. You could have
Yeah.
different packages for different tiers of clients with
Mhm.
how much they spend with you and everything. Check out Client Viral.
Client viral.
They do awesome stuff. And I just gave him a shout. I got to hit up the guy that I know over there, be like, "Hey, you're welcome." But no, it's really cool stuff. It's all personalized, totally
Yeah,
personalized stuff.
that's the. I mean, I want to say, and I'm not a fan of influencing stuff in general. I think that a lot of it is canned, but there was I think it was a Gary V video from a long time ago, and it was something about the fact that there was a guy bought bought some wine on his site, and he looked him up, and he sent him a personalized jersey, whatever, and like never heard anything back for 3 months. And then, lo and behold, 3 months later, this other dude comes in and buys like 90 cases of a particular vintage or whatever, and
It just
says,
took him that long to drink it.
well, no, well, it was a different guy, right? And what it was, hey, my buddy, he raved about you guys all the time, and he said, I got to give you a try, right? You did well by him. I trust you'll do well by us.
So you got the
And
accidental referral.
you get the accidental referral thing, and he's in a PS. I'm a big fan of Boba Fett or whatever, right? And like, he is expecting the same thing, but
Amazing.
regardless, right? Like, that's how you have to be personalized as much as you can be. And I know it's hard at a Fortune 500 level to be that personalized, but there's still things that can be done all the way up to that point of real personal touches.
And personalization is not a function first name, function company name, function job title apostrophe S like you. That is
Yeah.
not personalization.
Have you seen the one recently about, like, they do the geo search and then they plug in this like random line about, hey, if you're in San Francisco, I
Oh
hear
my
X
god, yeah.
restaurant is really good on Y
Oh my,
Street.
you know what I do just to fish them out is that on LinkedIn I say that I work in a different industry than the industry that I work in. So it's like, oh yeah, I'm trying to connect with people from this industry. I'm like, yeah, I'm not in IT and services. Root them all
Yeah,
out.
but it's like it's I understand tools, right? And I understand why you do it the way you do it. But like at the end of the day, an ABX approach to life in general works a lot better, right? Like it
I'm gonna quote that.
personal.
I'm stealing that from you. An ABX approach works better in life.
Yeah. I mean, it's true, right? You think about it, it's the personalization. It's making people have an emotional, visceral reaction to what you're doing based off of some mutual experience that you have, or even the fact that you have empathy for what they are going through. And I don't think you can do that through mass personalization. I don't think you can do that way. And
No,
you
you
know,
could be relevant at scale. You cannot personalize at scale. Whoever invented the
exactly.
term personalization at scale should be shot and dragged by a horse. Yeah, not even joking. Now, that was some marketer. Don't know who it was. I'm sorry to whoever did it if you're still living today. But you can't do it. It's relevance at scale, and it needs to be segmented, segmented, segmented. You can't do mass scale. You could just do scaled chunks of relevance to attract, not to sell. And I'm so sick of getting these sales emails that are actually trying to sell me. You're not going to sell me anything. I promise you, you will never sell me anything unless I need it and I didn't know it existed.
Yeah. I mean, this is where one of the things that we're producing right now. It hasn't gone out yet, but it's for our next. We're trying to do an outbound cadence, right? And what are we targeting? We're going to target people who have job postings out for RevOps, and we're going to send them, hey, we're in the space. Here's a RevOps hiring guide.
You're literally helping them do it, but then there are two types of people in this world. There's the
Yeah.
people with a whole lot of time and very little money. And then there are the people with with no time at all and a whole lot of money. And
Yeah.
it's just you need to appeal to both of them.
Mhm.
But you
And that's
want
where
the
I
people
don't
who
have
have
any problem.
a whole lot
I
of
don't
money, very little time.
I have no problem giving people the tools to be successful themselves, right? But they have to realize that it takes somebody a good 3 years of instruction in order to get to the point of being even an entry level good RevOps person, right? And if they're not willing to put in the time to get there, it is so much less. Like it's just so much less on energy, impact, everything to go with a provider that actually knows what they're doing,
Yeah, and
right?
with something that you do, you're leaving them with something that they can walk away with and implement and not need you again until the next operational change, if they so choose. But you're leaving them with something that is sustainable. That's the idea.
Well, I'll push back on you there a little bit because we don't necessarily think it ever stops,
Well, it
right?
doesn't.
Like
It doesn't.
like we finish one project and then there's the next and the next. And that's why we work on the annual thing because it's saying, hey, you know that there's going to be another tool you want in 3 months. You know that your process is going to change, or you've onboarded 30 people, or you've, blah, 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 blah. The only industry in which we are not needed long term is a stagnant one. If your company is exactly where you want it to be and you just want to maintain, you can make it more efficient, right? And you can make it more optimized. But at some point you're going to reach peak existence, and if nothing changes, if none of the other variables change, all right,
There needs to
God
be the
bless.
desire, though. That
Good luck.
you need to want to not grow at that point. And people
Exactly.
say, "Oh yeah, no, I always want to grow." They always claim that, but I've met so many businesses and business owners that don't want to grow. No, I'm happy where I am. So, okay, settling because it's enough. That doesn't make any sense to me. What?
I'm with you. No, I'm with you. It's complacency. Although I understand it.
Well, people
Right?
love comfort. It's familiarity.
People love comfort, and they like the fact that at a certain point in this world, you can make $1 million a year, have a relatively simple business, and be very happy. Spend
I
more
know
time with
someone who
your
owns
kids.
10 food trucks. They make a mill a year.
Yeah, that's what like the best businesses in the world are the ones that are the unsexy ones, right? There's a business in the Bay Area. Guy opened it up in the '60s. Immigrant family came in, opened it up in the '60s. It hasn't changed. The folks drive minivans to and from the place, right? '90s minivans or whatever. They live next to Steve Wozniak, right? Like literally same neighborhood as the Woz, and you would never know it, right? and they work hard day in and day out on that business, but they are doing gangbusters, right?
What do they sell?
Falafel. It's called Falafel's
Oh, I
Drive-In
love
in the
falafel.
Bay
Good
Area,
falafel, man.
right?
Oh,
And it's like, it's my favorite business because in the heart of Silicon Valley, they've been here before it was Silicon Valley, and they've done the exact same thing. And as a result, they're wealthier than most people, and they're happier, right? I was just talking with them. I'm like, tell me there's another generation because it's on its second gen now. And it's like, yes, there is. Some of the grandkids
good,
want to
because
do it.
sometimes the kids don't want to do it.
Exactly. Because it's not sexy, right? And that's the whole thing about, it doesn't need to be sexy to be successful, right? Sometimes it can be, and that's great, right? If you want to go and create the next Facebook, fantastic. But I always say, just find a fucking problem. Find a problem that
I mean,
exists.
one of the most profitable businesses and fastest growing businesses in the world right now is waste management.
Yeah. Right.
Waste management through any recession, anything else. I mean, the company waste management, WM, right?
Yep.
In the stock market and the ticker. If you invested in them, it's been a constant state of continuous growth since they started the business.
Yeah. That's why I always loved Home Depot growing up as a stock. HD is the stock ticker.
Yep.
Right? They were like the absolute steadiest thing ever.
Oh, I
Right?
threw a
It
bunch of money
always
into
went up.
Lowe's Home Improvement. Right when
Yeah.
COVID hit, I was like, oh, everybody's going to be doing home projects.
Right.
Just bought a
Yeah.
bunch of stock.
I don't know. I just, I think there's a lot of startups that fail, right? You and I see them. There's a lot of
Well, it's about
startups.
90%.
Right. And that's, and you have to question why, right? Why do they fail? And a lot of them are process driven. A lot of them are they didn't reach scale or they were operating a loss or whatever. But I think most of the ones that fail, they weren't solving a problem to begin with. They were creating the problem and trying to artificially solve the problem that they created in their own heads. If you go and you sit down and you actually look at what are people struggling with on a day-to-day basis and you make their lives just a little bit easier, that's where you're at, right? Our original tagline was we make Salesforce easy because people hated Salesforce, right? They hated having to
Oh,
work with it,
I can't even get started on that
right?
platform.
And that was the secret to the success, right? You make something difficult easy for people and they'll throw money at you, right? It doesn't have to be complicated and it doesn't have to be in software. It can be in any industry, right? You know, flat tires made easy or oil changes made easy or fucking
There's
combine
a guy right
harvester.
now. He's like the newest millionaire in my area, the RTP area. So Research Triangle Park in North Carolina.
Yeah.
It's like the Silicon Valley of the East, is what they say.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the fastest growing businesses. This guy just became a new millionaire, and it's literally an oil change service that comes to you.
Right.
That's
And
it.
it's like, great. Good for you, man. And it's more secure than most software businesses anyways, because you're always going to need an oil change. Right? Like this is the other thing, right? Pick something like guns and butter, right? You're not gonna, technologies change. That's the thing that scares the shit out of me, right? Like technologies change. We got to be up to date on it. I have people who work full time for us, just keeping track of the technologies and when the new markets are.
Do you
And
see how many updates happened to HubSpot over the past 3 weeks?
Right. And you got to have somebody committed to doing that, let alone you worry about what happens when an incumbent has a fast new person coming in. If you train your entire business model to an incumbent and they get disrupted, then so goes your business, right? And you got to be up to date on it. Oil change doesn't need that. Custom screen solutions don't need that. Like
The
this
way
is
you
where,
change oil pretty much hasn't changed since the 60s.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
And yet there's a guy who just made another $1 million, became a millionaire because he looked at it a different way and saw the problem that people can't make it to the shop or it's an inconvenience for them to make it down there. And so he'll come to them.
That's my life. I've used his service because I don't have time.
Right. And you give people back time, the most valuable thing of all.
In the end, that's all that matters. Now, for the next segment here, I know we've talked for a while, but for the next segment here is that what is the takeaway that you want people to remember or apply to their business today that can provide them the most value in the shortest period of time?
The most value in the shortest period of time. We've talked about a lot of things, Rob, right? Like this is a hard one because of how diverse our conversation has been.
You
I
can
guess
pick more than one.
so we'll go with two, right? Let's start fundamentally, and it's saying that if you ever want to, run a business or even run the business of your life a little bit more effectively, do the ABX is the best way to approach your life thing, right? Because at the end of the day, whether it's it stretches anywhere from dating to business success to the way you treat the folks at the grocery counter to everything, right? Go just a little bit out of your way to make it a personalized interaction, and that's going to be, people will either remember you or at the very least, you'll make their day a little bit better, right?
I had to
You
become a damn good bartender before becoming a damn good salesperson.
What's your drink?
What's my drink?
What's the best
Well,
drink in the
well,
arsenal?
my favorite drink is actually just a proper bourbon on the rocks, but probably a Maker's Mark 46 Manhattan with a touch extra vermouth and a touch extra grenadine, but it needs to be the real stuff that you extract yourself.
Okay. All right.
That's
All
what I
right.
like. And I like the orange peel with it too, as you would with an old fashioned. But I like the citrusy flavor in with the vermouth.
Okay. So you are more of a cocktail artist than merely a bartender.
Well, so I got a mixology license because working in New York as a bartender, you kind of need one.
Mm.
Otherwise, you're not really getting a job anywhere. But then going down to North Carolina was interesting. I was bartending on the weekends for funsies, really, and doing really I love high volume clubs. Like I
Mm.
want to be just point bartending is what they call it. You. What do you want? And then you make them as fast as possible, but you need to be able to do it with flair, right?
Mm.
If you've ever seen the Tom Cruise movie, where you're flipping the bottles,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
stuff,
yeah,
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 that's the stuff I had to learn, and it's just so much fun. So, learning how to make a huge, just plethora of different types of drinks as fast as possible, love it. And then I do day shifts on the weekends so that I can understand how to actually build relationships and rapport with people better. Because when you're a bartender, you're really more so their psychiatrist.
yeah.
And the better you can connect with them, the more they like you, the more money they give you. And that's why the best upsell line when I was bartending is, if they say they don't want anymore, it's like, no, I'm good. It's like, oh, you're good, but you could be great. Then they go, oh. So 40% success rate on that upsell. If that failed, they say, no, I'm great. You're great, but you could be incredible. That had about a 25% success rate beyond that point cumulatively. So
Yeah.
you're getting an upsell probably somewhere around 60% of the times at that point.
Well, you could talk about that as well. I guess the other takeaway that I'll say is that think about RevOps, right? We've talked a lot here. It's important, even if you're not entirely sure what it is and how it relates to your business. Like at the end of the day, do a little bit of education. Put in that 15 minutes at the end of the workday to kind of figure out where you're at on that subject. Because I think I genuinely believe that that's one of the things that holds people back from explosive growth that they're trying to go for.
I love it. Absolutely. And if someone wants to read up on RevOps, I got an article. It's called Confessions of a RevOps Hitman. It's in gtmmag.com. And that pretty much summarizes like the whole thing that could pretty much benefit everything that we just spoke about today. Do you have any books or any articles that you have to share?
No, I'll point them towards Rosalind. Go look up Rosalind Santa Elena. She
Oh, you can't go wrong with that.
That's what she produces an awful lot of content, and it's all beneficial.
Love it. Love it. Well, thank you so much for coming on today, Seamus. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So again, this is Down the Rabbit Hole Podcast, hashtag DTRH Podcast, and hashtag High Volume is Dead. Never forget it. Put a little skull after it to make the impact, because people need to learn that high volume is dead, right? It's just put the nail in the coffin already. If you enjoyed this episode, follow Down the Rabbit Hole Podcast for new episodes weekly on Podbean, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Pandora, and YouTube. If you'd like to apply to be featured on the podcast or recommend a featured guest, please feel free to email us